Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump met for the first time face-to-face at the ABC News presidential debate this week. Flash polls showed that a majority of viewers said Harris won the debate, and her campaign was quick to call for a second debate moments after the first one wrapped up. Trump, on the other hand, has wavered on whether he will take part in a second debate. So what's the state of the race post-debate, and what can we expect to see next in the polls? Here to go on the record is our good friend Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, as always, it's so great to see you. Let's jump right into it. Are we seeing any post-debate bump for Kamala Harris besides those initial flash polls?
Well, we aren't, and I don't expect to for about another week. I expect a lot of the big reputable pollsters to go in the field this weekend after people have had time to digest the debate, and they're going to start making news early next. One thing I would note, I'm not expecting a huge bump for either candidate in the polls. The electorate's pretty polarized. I understand the post-election or the post-debate polls show that, Harris won, but, Trump, I don't think lost any supporters in that debate. And I think the independents, depending on the post-debate poll you looked at, slightly lean towards Harris, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to move everything.
So that's a completely different takeaway, obviously, from the first presidential debate of the general election cycle. That obviously certainly had an impact, leading to President Biden dropping out of the race. So, Scott, how much will this debate ultimately, move the needle down the line? I mean, you sort of just answered that question, but, if we're saying that in a week we'll start to see the results, I mean, a week is a lifetime in politics.
Especially when Donald Trump is the candidate. Look, my favorite takeaway from this is I don't think it'll move it a lot, but we are in probably the closest election we've seen this century. Right now, the forecast says Kamala Harris at a 54% chance of winning. That's down a couple points over the last couple weeks. That's essentially a coin flip. Every single swing state is within a couple of points, if not less than a point. So while I don't think the debate's going to move the polling that much, it doesn't take that much to affect either one of these, any one of these states.
Absolutely. And, like I said, the Harris campaign feeling good about that first debate. They immediately called for a second debate, but Trump obviously wavering on whether he wants to do one. Republican lawmakers have told, myself and our colleagues at the Hill that they were somewhat unhappy with President Trump's performance and, questioning whether he should even take part in this next debate. Do you think we'll see another debate?
Man, I hope we will. I'm a little surprised, VP Harris's team minutes after the debate called for another one. Donald Trump called into Fox and Friends yesterday morning and he wavered and did not take the bait on that one. I tend to think there should be, and I would imagine they would, but they got to accept it sooner rather than later because we're running out of days. So I really don't know on that one.
Absolutely. And, going back to Tuesday's debate, both candidates were pressed on their plans to boost the economy, and polls show that issue continues to be a major priority for voters. But polling shows Trump has an edge when it comes to the economy. But was Harris able to move the needle at all in the debate? I mean, we know that she was forced to release more specifics about her plan, which she has faced pushback about not being detailed enough.
Yeah, you bring up the economy. In most of these polls, Donald Trump, more voters trust Donald Trump with the economy by 15 to 20 points. So did she move the needle? Maybe, but do I think she moved the needle, 15, 20 points on that certain policy issue? I guess we'll wait next week until we see the polling, but I doubt we see that. Also, immigration. That's the second biggest issue in the race, and Donald Trump leads by double digits on that issue as well. I'm not necessarily sure that the needle was moved a lot on that one, if any.
Right. And, we were talking about post-debate. One of the biggest nights or takeaways from debate night was Taylor Swift coming out minutes after the debate and finally endorsing Harris. It was a long time coming, but how big of a game changer is this given her massive following? We saw that this week the Federal Services Administration said that over 300,000 people visited the vote.gov website, and, that 300,000 number, that was as of Wednesday. Wednesday afternoon. I'm sure that number has climbed since then. So what's her impact going to be?
Well, it'll be interesting because that's a federal site. I'm sure someone's going to FOIA it. We're going to see how many registrations it actually led to and what states they're in. It remains to be seen, how many of those people actually fill out a form and voted. It's certainly going to be more than zero. But I think where the impact is more is going to be on the fundraising. I've already seen in Kamala Harris's emails referencing the Taylor Swift endorsement. Obviously, Taylor Swift did it on Instagram, social media. It's much easier to send Harris $5 on a website than it is to register to vote and wait a couple of months to actually do it. So I think the impact is going to be immediate on the fundraising and remains to be seen on the actual votes.
Absolutely, and we'll be looking for those new fundraising numbers in a few weeks. But new Morning Consult poll released this week showed Trump leading Harris by only 2 points in Florida. And Scott, you and I have been talking all week about this. So I'm going to ask you again: is this a sign that Florida is in play?
Oh man, this is one of those ones. Every cycle, Florida comes up, and what I will say before I answer your question is, Florida is a supermajority state in the state legislature for Republicans. I believe the Republicans have all, if not the vast majority, of statewide elected offices, including a governor who won Miami-Dade by double digits just 2 years ago. And so I say that to lead up is Florida is, from a empirical standpoint, pretty Republican. So I doubt that it's that close, but that's not the first poll we've seen where Rick Scott is within 5 and Donald Trump is within 5, two of the Republican candidates running. Our forecast has that state pretty solidly in Donald Trump and Rick Scott's corner for both president and Senate. So while I think that poll's close, I think my bet would be Florida goes red this fall.
So you mentioned that Senate race, but we know that Florida is also home to 2 ballot measures this cycle. Those 2 ballot measures, Amendment 3 and 4, are aiming to legalize recreational marijuana and enshrine abortion rights into the state's constitution. Both of those measures need 60% of the vote to pass. So you mentioned Florida being a supermajority state. It's interesting. Democrats I talked to say that these ballot measures help juice the turnout for them. But I imagine to get 60% to pass, they need Republicans in Florida. So how are these ballot measures impacting Rick Scott and Donald Trump?
I think it will cut down their margins. Rick Scott's been elected a lot in Florida, and he's been elected each time by less than 100,000 votes. So he's kind of used to these close races. This is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I think there are some Republican pro-marijuana and Republican pro-choice split ticket voters out there. Maybe not as many as, straight Democratic voters across the board, along with those 2 amendments. But I think the vote's a little bit more split than people think. And I think that's going to show up in the final numbers here.
And Florida has a history of, voters supporting liberal ballot measures, like in 2020, voting to raise the minimum wage, but turning around and voting for Donald Trump. So this isn't new for Florida, but Democrats obviously saying abortion is a very different issue. It's a galvanizing issue. So we'll see if that, blue wave we saw in 2022 that, on abortion, that didn't seem to play a role in Florida, if it impacts Florida this time around with a 6-week abortion ban and this ballot measure on this amendment on the ballot. Sticking with that Senate race, though, I want to go back to a poll released last week showing that Florida Senate Democratic candidate, former Congresswoman Debbie McCarcel-Powell, she's trailing Rick Scott by only 2 points. But other polls, and we've mentioned this before, including that same Morning Consult poll, shows Scott leading her by around 5 points. How wide is that margin actually, and how worried should Scott be? I mean, going back to his past gubernatorial races and in his Senate races, he's the master of winning by a very narrow margin.
Yeah, look, our average, I believe, as of this morning, has Rick Scott plus 3.5, plus 4. And that's him outperforming his electoral past, right? So in a way, I would say that's good for him. That's, you and I look at that and say, that's a little closer than Florida should be. But for him, he's outperforming his past electoral performances. I think the Rick Scott race is going to be close. I don't think he's behind. I think he's a little bit worried, as he should be. He always puts a lot of money into his races, and he's out there. He's at the debate the other night. He's doing a lot more events around the state. He's really campaigning, which, he always does every election cycle. He's running this race a little bit more like a battleground state than he normally does. And, if history is a guide to the future, he's probably going to eke it out.
Absolutely. Well, I want to move over to the House of Representatives. The government is facing a potential government shutdown, and Speaker Mike Johnson obviously has a lot on his plate ahead of November's election. He was forced to pull his continuing resolution this week after failing to garner enough support from inside the party. Former President Trump also weighed in, telling lawmakers to shut down the government if the SAVE Act isn't included. Scott, how do you see this playing out? I would assume that most lawmakers, and we know that Congress already has a pretty low approval rating with the American people, don't want this sort of political gamesmanship playing out before an election.
And wasn't it like 10 years ago we were talking about McCarthy getting kicked out and Johnson in? That seems like a political,
Yeah,
man, decade ago. No, but that was about a year ago.
I've aged 10 years.
Yeah. And man, government shutdown. I think you and I have talked about that a lot
Yeah.
as well. Look, I think the American public is like government shutdown when we were talking about that a week ago, 10 years ago, and that seems to be the only thing Congress votes on is government shutdown this or government shutdown that. I think at the end of the day, a government shutdown, as some of these swing state Republicans have noted, would not be good for the Republicans' chances of keeping the House. It would just give the Democratic candidates more ammunition to say, hey, Republicans are controlling the budget and they can't even get anything across. But some of these people who are opposing the CR have some good issues that are on Americans' minds. Simply the deficit. I don't think we're up for a debt limit in the next couple of months, but we will be early in the next administration. And some of these members pushing this, they're in safe races. So it's not going to be a good thing politically for the Republicans. I think up and down the ticket if there's a shutdown. But, look, Congress is pretty unpredictable, especially the House. And so we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks if they decide to make themselves an issue in this 2024 election.
So I want to move to the upper chamber, where Senate Republican Whip John Thune made a lot of headlines this week after announcing he will transfer $4 million from his campaign account to the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee. That is obviously the campaign arm of Senate Republicans. Do you think this move will help his chances of taking over or getting a higher spot in Republican leadership, perhaps Mitch McConnell's job this November? And who else has a chance of replacing McConnell?
Absolutely. The entire move was just to get people like us to talk about it and say, man, that's a lot of money. And, especially if it looks like it helps the Republicans keep the Senate, which is a safe bet, it's a good propellant forward. Look, he seems to be the front runner. The Senate is considered the most exclusive club in the world of just 100 total senators. And, there's probably only going to be 50, give or take 2 Republican senators deciding this here in a few months. So it's going to be pretty close. Rick Scott, who we just talked about, had run in the past. I don't think he has a great chance, but he got, I think, 10 or 11 votes last time, so he might throw his ring in there. You've got John Barrasso, John Cornyn, both in Senate leadership, both raising money. They have conspicuously not said how much they've been given yet or given out, even though they're good fundraisers. At least I haven't seen anything. Maybe you have. So, I think this is a good move by John Thune and some of these other names I mentioned. They're going to have to step up a little bit if they're going to be, competitive when they hold that vote here in a few months.
There is so much talent in line for Senate Republican leadership, and I imagine it's a good problem for Republicans to have, but at the same time, this could potentially turn contentious, but we'll have to see. Scott, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel.